Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. You've probably looked at the title of this talk and wondered, what the heck is this guy going to talk about today? And I must admit, when I saw the title and I rang Natalie about it, I was like, what exactly do you want me to tell these guys about UAV usage? What Natalie wanted me to step you through today was a bit of, I guess, the journey that I've been on as an individual, but also on behalf of our department, looking at using UAVs and getting certifications and things in place that will enable us to do the research and development work that we do as a department. So a little bit about the area of DAF that I belong to. I'm in the crop and food science area of the department. Our general business is research, development and extension, primarily for the grains and the cotton industry. And UAVs caught my attention quite early in about 2014. At that point in time, one of the things that we're quite involved in was making, of all things, YouTube videos for the cotton industry around best practices for all sorts of cotton production tactics, pest management tactics and the likes. And we thought, gee, you know, you're always on the hunt for something that's a little bit interesting or a point of difference. You know, aerial footage of different planting operations and various farm operations would really bring a different perspective to those videos and perhaps attract more people to look at them. And one of the other pests that we were dealing with at the time is a thing called Solenopsis mealybug that had turned up in Emerald and also out at St George and a few places. And it's a very difficult pest to detect in crops. If you can get up on top of a ring tank wall and look across a paddock, you'll see these characteristic purple blotches you can see in that photo there in the slide. But again, not every paddock's beside a ring tank wall, and obviously we thought UAVs might have potential to allow us to find pests like that and go in and sort of sample those fields much more efficiently. And the third thing was, well, hey, how cool would it be to have a UAV fly around at work on work time? So, as they sort of say, ignorance is strength. I looked around, again, a lot's changed in the last couple of years, but I found this particular unit. It was a Vulcan heavy lift drone, and bought it because at that point in time there was very few UAVs out there that could carry a GoPro. This was one of them, so a huge bit of kit to carry a little tiny camera. You think about what's out there today and how much has changed. But we also thought maybe it had the capacity to have a few other sensors and things on it. But as I said, ignorance is strength, and the supplier for this particular unit didn't really enlighten me as to some of the regulations involved with UAV usage. And I sort of had an inkling that might have been something that we had to do, asked some obvious questions, didn't get very clear answers. And it wasn't until we actually got hold of this thing and started talking to more people about it, worked out there was a catch. And the catch was the CASA regulations. So that joy was rapidly replaced by hard work. Those books there, you can see that's my kitchen table. I spent about 3 to 4 months studying of evenings on weekends to pass a private pilot's licence exam. So if you go back sort of only 18 months, 2 years ago, the process to get CASA certification was to get a controller certification. So if you like, that was your licence to actually be the operator of the UAV. And then you have to go and get a UOC after that, which you like is the rule book of which you operate your equipment under as an organisation. So when I did this, you had to pass a private pilot's licence exam. It tell you all sorts of things about how to load aircraft, you know, whether they're Alpha, Bravo, Charlie loading mechanisms. You're left an airport at Narrabri, flying to St George, look out the window, you're off course. You know, how do you work out how to get back on course? Not overly relevant to the usage of UAVs. Certainly some aspects of the PPL process was relevant, but a huge amount of effort to get that sort of ticket. 2 attempts at PEXO exam later, got that ticket. And 3 weeks before I sat that exam, CASA changed the regulations in that you could do an in-house course with a provider and with information that was much more relevant to the pursuit. But anyway, that was the joy of being an early adopter. And then getting the UAV operator's certification, again, really lengthy delays. So I got my controller certification through around February in 2015. I think we've lodged our application in March. And then you play a waiting game. And basically it took us through until December 2015 before we actually had our UOC in place. So in terms of process, you think I sort of first got interested in drones in early 2014, went and got a bit of equipment. That bit of equipment pretty much stayed grounded until through to December 2015, 12 grand later on certifications, training, etc. We were finally in business. So credit at last, what next? Well, one of the first things is UAVs had changed dramatically. So that big behemoth of a drone has never actually flown for some of our work purposes, because a Phantom 4 that you can see in front of it can do everything that that big drone can do, plus some. And, you know, managing a Phantom 4 is just so much easier than managing that big piece of equipment in terms of transporting it, keeping track of batteries, and just the functionality of that equipment. So that had changed a lot. And again, a lot of the CASA regulations are continually changing. So if we'd probably started today looking at that small bit of equipment, you might be tempted to operate under the new regulations that are there. So, but that said, for a large organisation such as Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, I can see a lot of benefits in having UOC. So for us as an organisation, it provides an excellent platform because it gives us legally approved operations, irrespective of what changes might come down the pipeline or what, future regulatory ambiguity, which there's been quite a lot of ambiguity, particularly over the last 6 months with the announcement of changes that were coming through. For us as an organisation, it's given us a mechanism for which we can have staff training and accreditation. So we're a large organisation. What we really want to avoid is having people just going down, the local hobby store, getting hold of drones and doing things willy-nilly. So it's given us a mechanism and a way of getting everyone on the same page and doing things the right way. That goes hand in hand with our internal lock health and safety systems. So again, you've got people doing things, you sort of want everyone to be singing from the same song sheet and doing things in the right way. The other important thing for us as an organisation is that it's given us a mechanism for public liability and just general insurance. So a lot of you, if you're starting to do commercial operations, have probably looked into some of the issues around this, but having a UOC is of tremendous advantage when you're looking at getting insurances. And I guess having a UOC in place now as a department gives us the opportunity to build on future users, such as beyond visual line of sight and some of the things that some of the people within our department are interested in moving into somewhere down the track. And of course, now that Muggin's here, sat his pilot's licence exam and went through all the process and got a UOC in place, all of a sudden everyone has a use for UAVs within a department and everyone seems to want to have a drone. So to give you an idea of some of the, breadth of operations with which the department is looking at operating in over the coming 12 to 18 months, biosecurity, for example, have got a real interest in fire ants. So they've been using sensing technologies mounted off helicopters. They want to be able to take things down to that next scale when you get sort of into an area of interest and use UAVs to scan for fire ant nests. You can sort of see in this imagery there's some fire ant nests. And they've been doing some work, obviously, with helicopters, but very clearly potential for using UAVs to bridge that gap, if you like, between those broad-scale set of imagery and narrowing down to where things might be across a 5-acre plot. Forestry have expressed a keen interest in using UAVs. So forestry's issues, they have a number of fire towers located throughout the state. Those fire towers, a lot of them no longer meet current health and safety guidelines in terms of the ladders and safety aspects of climbing up and down those towers. The state's faced with the potential challenge, do we bring all these fire towers into current day health and safety standards, or perhaps do we just use a UAV that on those days where there's a higher fire risk, you go to set points around those forestry areas, pop a UAV in the air, scan around for signs of smoke, come back down and go on to the next place. So forestry have an interest in UAV for fire spotting. Fisheries is another area that are very keen to look at how they might be able to exploit the UOC. One of the things they commonly get from members of the public is reports of damage to mangroves. So in a first instance, before you might go and get warrants and things to go and have a look, you may be able to use the UAV to collect some basic imagery to work out whether there might be a case that's worth taking further and going down the normal regulatory pathways. The other thing that UAVs would be very useful for our fisheries officers is collecting evidence. I was talking to an officer up at Corumba in the Gulf, and he regularly comes across illegal fishing nets, and part of his job is he needs to collect photographic imagery of those fishing nets, so when it goes to court there's something to go through. Usually though, between him and the net, it's always at low tide, these things pop out. There's about 300 metres of mud frats and a big saltwater crocodile between him and the net, and he currently manages to wade his way around all that to take a photo. Imagine how much more useful just having a Phantom 4, being able to pop off from his, fly off from his tinny, go over, take that picture, come back, job done, and hasn't had to put himself in harm's way. And in the area that I sort of am more specialising in, we're looking at using UAVs for some of that more specific imagery around pest detection, doing plant counts, biomass assessment and plant breeding. So at the moment, for example, in the sorghum breeding team, we have a number of staff members that go around and literally do plant counts in plots, count the number of heads on those plots, and they have thousands and thousands of plots every season that they assess. They're looking at the potential to use UAV-based imagery to do those assessments much more quickly and efficiently. So with all these potential new users that are currently undergoing their controller certification and will come online over the coming 6 months and operating under the DAF UOC, you can see the complexity that we face as an organisation. Potentially will have staff members that I need to manage from Cairns all the way through to Grundy and South Queensland across different, I guess, interests in terms of what it is that they're doing. And it's going to create a potential compliance nightmare for the Chief Controller, which is me. So for every single operation, and for those of you that are not familiar with how UOC sort of works, if you like, it's the rules of which you're going to operate your equipment under and manage your equipment. And you've got a risk assessment that you might do before a flight. You've then got a job safety assessment that you might do. You've actually got data that you've got to collect around the particular aircraft, both pre and post-flight. You've got your individual pilot records. So there's a whole heap of paperwork that is about the operation of the equipment, but also about the maintenance of the equipment. And at the moment, our UOC is paper-based, but you can sort of see very quickly when we go from myself and 2 other operators that are in the same building in Toowoomba to having operators across the state, there is a real potential nightmare with this process. So with the complexity of managing a number of people and a number of different pieces of equipment, our solution is to go to a paperless system. So we've been assessing a prototype version of this. This is put out by CRM. It's RPA manager software, and this software we've been road testing it over about the last 6 weeks, would appear to be able to solve all of our, I guess, management and paperwork aspects with the UOC very, very seamlessly. So to give you an example, this software is cloud-based. People can log in with their phones, they can log in through a computer. We can lodge all of our UOC documentation there, so people can locate that information. We can do document control. So if we make a change to the UOC and that change needs to be read by all of our operators, they can go in, do that, virtually sign it, acknowledge that they've seen those changes, and it keeps a record of all of that. It keeps a record of people's qualifications when they might expire. When it comes to doing the job safety assessment, it integrates with Google Maps, it will integrate with Oz Runways. You can basically set up the job site, everything's automated. Once it's submitted, I get a ping on my phone as the Chief Controller. I can just go in, look at it, approve it or not approve it, suggest amendments, but basically the whole thing's paperless. If I then want to run a report, when we come to an auditing process, I can just go in, bang, run a report, everything's line of sight, all runs through. It'll give us an idea of when a particular UAV needs to have maintenance done on it, for example. So the whole thing is very much a paperless solution, and we're fairly happy with the way this has been set up. You can completely customise this system, and we'll be looking to apply to CASA very shortly to shift, I guess, from our paper-based system over to using this electronic system, which I think is going to make our life really, really a lot easier to manage and a lot more effective. Just the other sleeper that I might touch on before wrapping up is data management. So this is not something that I've put a lot of effort into thinking about managing, but I thought I would flag it at a forum like this, is that the imagery that we're collecting, and I think about our department and all the different things that people think they're going to be doing in the near future, is how do you deal with all that imagery? How do you store it? There is a real burden of storage with this data. So I think Catherine said this morning, you start scanning things at a centimetre resolution and you go and do a 30-acre paddock, which is a very small paddock, and all of a sudden you're looking at gigabytes upon gigabytes of data, and how do you store that and do something useful with it? The other issue too, and again from a state government point of view, is privacy and also maintaining of records. So as a public servant, I need to maintain records of everything that I do. So whether it be emails that I've sent, files that I've created for a minimum of 7 years. Well, again, I don't think anyone's really starting to think about this yet, but all that imagery that we're collecting, there's going to be burdens there for storage of that, and I imagine that will apply to local government as well as federal government. It's probably something that people haven't really started to consider, but it's something that I suspect if you come back to a forum like this in 2 years' time, will be something that people are talking about. The other issue too, of course, is privacy. And it's sort of funny looking for just things to make this slide a bit more visually interesting. You type in drone and privacy, you get all sorts of things come up, from people shooting drones down to signs like that little red one there. I was in the States last year for a holiday in one of the national parks we went into, had big signs up, no UAVs. So clearly I think you'll see a lot more of that in Australia in the years to come. So to sum up, for me personally, there's been very few rewards jumping in, being an early adopter of UAVs, certainly from a certification perspective. I sort of look at the amount of effort that it took to get those certifications in place, and if anything, we kind of parked the whole UAV thing to one side for the best part of 18 months, and in hindsight, some of that effort, if I could have put that into looking at some of the imagery processing and things where you actually want to get something useful out of using UAVs, would have been really rewarding. But the comment that I would make is I would say that it's probably just about safe to enter the sky. So certifications that you need are much easier to get now. The process that you go through is much more relevant to the use of a UAV. And also the software, and I haven't talked about today, I thought other people might, but there's software only in the last 6 months that is becoming increasingly available to actually do something useful with that imagery and get information out of it. Whereas that really just didn't exist even 12 to 18 months ago. So it's a space that I think's really come into its own, and with the changes to CASA's regulations, in a way creating a market for this, particularly for landholders, I think you'll see a lot of activity in this space over the next 12 months. So for your business, I think you should really ask yourself some of these questions when thinking about UAV usage. Think about what your target and your likely usage is. What is it that you want to get imagery for, and what information do you want out of that imagery? Think about legislation and compliance. There's still regulations there and they're quite significant. How does that fit with what you want to do? Think about equipment costs and obsolescence. That big drone, I said, it's never been used for a proper work job. It's $5 grand pretty much, I imagine. It'll collect dust on the shelf unless we can find a use for it. But these new, style of drones are just so much more capable, half the price, and do a lot more. So that's something to keep into account. Return on investment. Think about that capital outlay. Think about the legislative costs and the record keeping compared to outsourcing. There's so many startup businesses out there that are offering services. Might be cheaper just to outsource those services. And of course, there's the data handling and interpretation. So thank you, everyone, and hope you enjoy the rest of the forum.